Racist cop attacks black woman. Her truth exposes him completely. In this eye-opening video, we delve into a shocking incident that has sparked outrage across communities. A recent encounter between a police officer and a black woman has brought to light troubling issues of racial bias and misuse of authority. Witness the moment that has left many questioning the integrity of those sworn to protect and serve. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives.
Monica James sat quietly in the back of the grand auditorium, her presence blending seamlessly into the diverse crowd gathered for live political debate. She adjusted her glasses and leaned back slightly in her seat, taking in the lively atmosphere of the evening. This wasn't her first time attending such an event, but it was her first as an appointed judge. At only 35, Monica had already broken barriers, becoming one of the youngest and most accomplished judges in the state. However, despite her impressive achievements, her face was still relatively unknown to the broader public, a fact she was more than grateful for tonight. Tonight, Monica wasn't here to speak or to make her presence known. She was here as a quiet observer, eager to see the candidates' perspectives and their approaches to pressing legal and social issues that plague the community. The topic of race relations, systemic injustice and police misconduct was sure to arise, given recent events in the city. It was a matter close to Monica's heart, both as a woman of color and as a member of the justice system. She knew that as a judge, she would soon be presiding over many cases influenced by these very debates, and she wanted to hear firsthand how the city's leadership planned to address them. Seated not far from her was Officer Jacobson, his posture rigid and eyes scanning the room like a hawk hunting for prey. Dressed in his uniform, he exuded an air of authority that was almost suffocating. His sharp, judgmental gaze darted from one person to another, landing frequently on any person of color in the audience. It wasn't just any police officer, though. Jacobson had a history, one that many in the community knew all too well. His name was synonymous with racial profiling misconduct and a thinly veiled disdain for the black community. Yet in the department, he had managed to escape any serious punishment for his actions, always managing to land on his feet due to a combination of connections, excuses, and bureaucratic loopholes. Jacobson didn't recognize Monica. Why would he? To him, she was just another black woman in the crowd, someone who could potentially cause trouble, someone he needed to watch closely. But his eyes frequently narrowed when they landed on her, a mixture of suspicion and contempt flashing in them. He couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as he watched her. She was too quiet, too composed, as something about her made him uncomfortable, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Monica, on the other hand, was acutely aware of his presence. She had dealt with men like Jacobson before too many times. In fact, his posture, his body language, the way he seemed to size up the black individuals in the audience, as though they were potential threats, was all too familiar. But Monica wasn't here to make a scene. She was here to observe, to listen, and she wasn't about to let some overzealous, racist cop ruin her evening. The candidates took their places on stage, and the debate began. As each spoke, Monica took mental notes, paying close attention to their policies on criminal justice reform, the treatment of minorities by the police, and how they planned to address the deep-seated racial tensions that had escalated in recent years. The candidates' answers were mostly predictable, some towing the line with vague promises of better training and improved relations between the police and the community. Others were more direct, calling for a complete overhaul of the system, with harsh consequences for officers who abused their power. The tension in the room was palpable whenever the subject of law enforcement came up. Monica could feel it, and she wasn't the only one. Jacobson shifted in his seat each time one of the candidates mentioned police reform, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing further. It was clear that he didn't agree with the direction the conversation was taking. To him, the candidates were attacking his profession, his way of life, and he didn't like it one bit. As the debate progressed, Monica began to relax slightly. She felt a sense of hope as one of the candidates, a younger man with progressive ideas, passionately argued for sweeping changes in how police were held accountable. His words resonated with Monica. He spoke about the need for community oversight, the necessity of de-escalation training, and the importance of having a justice system that worked for all people, not just a privileged few. It was a message that aligned with Monica's own values and the vision she had for her role as a judge. A tea on. However, as the debate continued, Monica's focus momentarily shifted. She reached down to adjust her bag, which was resting at her feet. In doing so, her hand brushed against the hard surface of something cold and metallic. Her breath caught for a moment as she remembered what it was, her gun. Monica carried a firearm, as was her right as a judge, but she rarely had to use it. Still, it was something she kept with her for personal protection, especially in the current climate where judges, particularly those like her who were trying to hold powerful people accountable, were often targets. In her distraction, Monica's bag slipped off the edge of her chair and fell to the floor. The contents spilled out, and there, in plain sight, was her gun. The cold steel glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights of the auditorium. It was a small mistake, an accident, but one that did not go unnoticed by Officer Jacobson. His sharp eyes zeroed in on the gun almost instantly, and his demeanor changed in an instant. His body tensed. His hand instinctively moved to the holster at his side. Without hesitation, he rose from his seat, his towering frame moving swiftly through the crowd toward Monica. Monica barely had time to react before Jacobson was upon her, his hand already gripping her arm with a roughness that took her by surprise. "What the hell do you think you're doing with a gun in here?" Jacobson's voice was low and menacing, loud enough for the surrounding people to hear but controlled, calculated. Monica blinked, momentarily stunned by the intensity of his reaction. It was an accident," she stammered, trying to gather her thoughts as she pulled her arm back, attempting to stand her ground. I'm a judge. I have a license to carry that weapon." Jacobson's face twisted with contempt. A judge? He spat the word like it was a joke, his eyes narrowing further. And I'm supposed to believe that? You're just some thug trying to pull something, aren't you? The room grew tense as people began to notice the altercation. Murmurs spread through the crowd, and the candidates on stage paused, their attention now drawn to the disturbance. Monica's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the gravity of the situation. She could feel the weight of the stares, the judgment in the eyes of the people around her, but she refused to be intimidated. "I told you I'm a judge," she repeated firmly, locking eyes with Jacobson, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. "And I have every right to carry that weapon." But Jacobson wasn't listening. His mind was already made up. To him, she wasn't a judge. She wasn't even a person worth listening to. She was just another black woman, another threat that needed to be neutralized. "If I'm placing you under arrest," he growled, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You're coming with me." Monica's mind raced as she watched him snap the cuffs open, the cold metal gleaming ominously. This was spiraling out of control. She could see the familiar pattern, an innocent black person being falsely accused, their words ignored, their rights trampled upon, and she wasn't going to let it happen to her. Not here. Not now. Monica's heart raced as Jacobson's words echoed in her ears, "You're under arrest." She barely had time to process the situation her mind scrambling to make sense of how something so innocuous, a simple accident with her bag, had escalated into this. Her breath quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She was a judge, after all, someone who dealt with high-pressure situations regularly. But this was different. This wasn't a courtroom where she had control. She was in the hands of a man who was already convinced of her guilt before she had even spoken a full sentence. The audience around them was stirring now. Conversations had shifted from the debate on stage to the brewing confrontation between Monica and Officer Jacobson. A few people had their phones out, recording the scene as it unfolded, but the majority were either frozen in their seats or whispering anxiously to one another. Monica could feel their eyes on her, judging her just as Jacobson was. Jacobson, with his face twisted in anger, grabbed Monica's arm tighter, pulling her closer to him as he towered over her. "What are you trying to pull here, huh?" he demanded, his voice a harsh whisper that barely concealed his seething rage. "Who do you think you are, bringing a gun into a place like this? Do you think you're some kind of vigilante?" For Monica opened her mouth to protest, but he didn't give her the chance. His free hand darted toward her waist, roughly patting her down as he searched for more weapons. She recoiled at his touch, the blatant violation of her personal space stoking a fire inside her. "I told you I'm a judge," she repeated, her voice louder now, steady but edged with frustration. "I have a legal right to carry that gun." But it was no use. Jacobson wasn't listening. He wasn't interested in facts, only in his own narrative. His mind had already constructed the image of her as a dangerous threat, and nothing she said was going to change that. In his eyes, she was just another black woman who had stepped out of line, and he was going to put her back in her place. Monica glanced around, hoping for a friendly face, someone who might intervene, someone who recognized her, or at least had the decency to question Jacobson's extreme reaction. But the crowd seemed immobilized, unsure of how to react. Even the candidates on stage were silent now, their expressions a mix of confusion and discomfort. It was as if time had slowed down, the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone in the room. "I have a license," Monica shouted now, more forcefully. "I have a right to carry that gun under state law. You need to check the facts before you do something you'll regret." Jacobson sneered. "Sure, let's see some ID then, Your Honor." He spat the title mockingly as he leaned in closer, his eyes dark and cold. "But I'll tell you right now, it doesn't matter what kind of badge you flash at me. You're carrying a weapon in a public space, and I'm taking you in." Monica knew this situation was rapidly deteriorating. She could see the arrogance in his eyes, the conviction that he could do no wrong. In Jacobson's world, black people with guns were guilty until proven innocent, and even then their innocence was often ignored. She could sense how this was going to go. He wasn't going to listen, and the more she resisted, the worse it would become. Suddenly, she felt her pulse quicken again as she remembered the context of the debate. They were discussing police reform and systemic racism. How ironic that she, a black judge, was now being targeted by one of the very officers who exemplified the problem. It felt like a grim, twisted joke, but there was nothing funny about it. "Check my bag," Monica said firmly, her voice low but filled with determination. "You'll find my ID, my badge, and my gun permit in there." Jacobson gave her a contemptuous glance but made no move to check her belongings. Instead, he turned to the few officers who had arrived on the scene, his hand still gripping Monica's arm. "Take her in," he barked at them, ignoring her completely. One of the younger officers hesitated, his eyes darting between Jacobson and Monica, clearly uncertain. He recognized her face, though he wasn't sure from where. "Are you sure, sir?" the officer asked cautiously. "Maybe we should." "I said take her in." Jacobson interrupted, his voice thunderous and final. "Do I need to remind you who's in charge here?" The younger officer stepped back, clearly intimidated, while another moved forward, pulling out handcuffs. Monica watched in disbelief as they began to follow Jacobson's orders, despite her clear protests. She was an innocent woman, a judge with every right to be there, and yet none of that seemed to matter now. The reality of the situation began to sink in. She was going to be arrested, humiliated in front of this crowd, her reputation possibly tarnished before anyone had even bothered to verify her identity. Her bile, the sheer injustice of it boiled her blood, but she knew she had to stay composed. "Look, this is all a mistake," she said, her voice straining to maintain its calm. "I'm a judge. My ID is in my bag, and I have a license to carry that weapon. Check it before you do something you can't take back." Jacobson ignored her once more, and the officer placed the cold steel of the handcuffs around her wrists. Monica felt the weight of the metal digging into her skin, the sting of injustice burning in her chest. Her mind raced with thoughts of how this would play out, how she would have to fight her way through this, despite being in the right. Jacobson shoved her toward the officers, turning to the crowd with a self-satisfied smirk. He was loving this, the way the attention had shifted entirely onto him, how he was now the hero bringing down a dangerous criminal. In his mind, he had just made a big catch, and he wanted everyone to know it. The murmur of the crowd grew louder as they watched Monica being led away in handcuffs. Some faces were shocked, others judgmental, but no one was stepping in. No one was willing to question the officer's authority, not in a moment like this. Monica's pulse raced as she struggled to maintain her composure. She was furious not just at Jacobson, but at the entire system that allowed men like him to exist, to have this kind of unchecked power. She had spent years trying to work within the system to make it better, to ensure that justice was served fairly, and now here she was, being victimized by the very system she had fought so hard to uphold. As they escorted her toward the exit, Monica could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on her. She was being paraded like a criminal in front of them, her dignity stripped away in a matter of moments. Her mind churned with thoughts of how to fix this, how to turn this situation around before it got any worse. She would have to fight this in court, she knew that much. She would have to use every resource at her disposal to clear her name and expose Jacobson for what he was. But that was a battle for later. Right now, she had to focus on getting through this moment, on keeping her head held high despite the humiliating situation. But just as they reached the exit, Jacobson leaned in close to her ear, his voice dripping with malice. "You think you're something special, don't you?" he sneered. "Well, we'll see how special you feel when I'm done with you. People like you always think you're above the law. Not today." Monica didn't respond. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Instead, she focused on what was to come. She wasn't just some innocent bystander caught up in a bad situation. She was a judge, someone who knew the law inside and out, and she would use that knowledge to make sure Jacobson and those like him were held accountable. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As Monica was led out of the auditorium, her mind raced through a storm of emotions: fear, anger, and a deep sense of injustice. Her wrists stung from the tight handcuffs, the metal digging into her skin as she was pushed forward by the officers. She had fought too long and too hard to let herself be humiliated like this, but there was little she could do at that moment. Any resistance would only escalate the situation further, and that was the last thing she wanted. The scene outside the auditorium was chaotic. The crowd, which had once been captivated by the political debate, now buzzed with whispers and hushed conversations about the black woman being arrested in front of them. Several attendees had followed the commotion, their phones held up high, recording every second of the unfolding drama. It was as if Monica was being put on trial in the court of public opinion before she even had a chance to explain herself. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had come here as an observer, hoping to hear solutions for the very issues that now ensnared her: police misconduct, aimed in the interconduct, and the injustices that disproportionately affected Black Americans. And now she was at the center of it, victimized by the very system she had sworn to uphold. But this wasn't a simple case of mistaken identity or a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a few words. Officer Jacobson's actions were driven by something much darker and more sinister: his deep-seated racism and the belief that people like Monica were inherently criminal. Jacobson strutted beside her like a hunter parading his prey, his eyes gleaming with a twisted sense of satisfaction. He had caught someone he believed was a threat, and now he was going to make an example out of her. The reality that Monica was a judge, a woman of status and authority, didn't even register with him. In his eyes, she was simply another Black person who needed to be put in her place. So they reached the police car parked near the curb, and Monica was shoved inside the back seat, her hands still cuffed behind her back. The door slammed shut, and she found herself momentarily alone, the quiet hum of the car engine doing little to soothe the storm brewing in her mind. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, forcing herself to think logically. She knew she had to keep her composure. Panicking wouldn't help. There would be time to fight this once she was at the station, but for now, she had to survive this ordeal without losing control. Outside the car, Jacobson spoke with the other officers, his voice too low for her to hear, but she could see the smug expression on his face. He was proud of what he had done, proud of the fact that he had neutralized a threat, and Monica knew that no amount of reasoning or explanation would change his mind. To him, she wasn't a judge, a professional, or even a human being deserving of respect. She was simply a target. Suddenly, Jacobson opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. He didn't even glance back at Monica as he put the car in gear and began to drive away from the scene, leaving behind the flashing lights and murmuring crowd. The ride to the station was tense, filled with an oppressive silence that hung in the air like a storm cloud about to burst. Monica kept her eyes focused on the passing streets, mentally preparing herself for what was to come. She knew the legal process inside and out. She had seen countless defendants walk through the doors of the courthouse, some guilty, some innocent, but she had always believed in the awareness of the law. Now, for the first time, she was on the other side of the equation, and the bitter reality of her situation settled in. Jacobson finally spoke after what felt like an eternity, his voice dripping with condescension. "So you think you're a judge? Ha! That's rich." He let out a low, humorless laugh, shaking his head as if the very idea was absurd. "Obsessable. You don't look like a judge to me." Monica clenched her jaw, refusing to rise to the bait. She had learned long ago that men like Jacobson thrived on provoking reactions, on asserting their dominance by breaking people down. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. "You're making a mistake," she said calmly, her voice steady despite the fury boiling beneath the surface. "You should have checked my identification before jumping to conclusions." Jacobson glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his lip curling in disdain. "Your Idaho doesn't mean anything to me. You're carrying a weapon in a public space, and I don't care what kind of license you think you have. As far as I'm concerned, you're a danger to everyone in that auditorium, and I'm not taking any chances." Monica could barely contain her anger. She knew the law better than he did, knew that her rights were being trampled on, but it was clear that logic and reason had no place in this conversation. Artvisto, Jacobson had made up his mind, and nothing she said was going to change that. "And you're going to have to answer for this," she said, her voice low but firm. "You're violating my rights, And once this gets to court, you'll be the one facing consequences. Jacobson's eyes flicked to the mirror again, this time narrowing in anger. Is that a threat? He asked, his voice tight with barely restrained rage. It's not a threat, Monica replied coolly. It's a promise. They pulled into the station, and the tension inside the car thickened. Jacobson parked the vehicle and got out, slamming the door behind him. A moment later, the back door opened, and Monica was roughly pulled from the car by another officer who had been waiting for them. The station was bustling with activity officers moving about, phones ringing, conversations overlapping, but as Monica was led through the front doors in handcuffs, the usual noise seemed to die down. Eyes turned toward her, some curious, some indifferent, but none of them willing to question why a black woman was being brought in by Jacobson, a man known for his racially motivated arrests. Monica was taken to the booking area, where her personal belongings were removed and logged by the officer in charge. She noticed Jacobson hovering nearby, watching her every move with a predatory gaze. He wasn't done with her, not by a long shot. For once the booking process was completed, Monica was placed in a holding cell. The cold metal bars clicked shut behind her, and the weight of her situation finally settled on her shoulders. She was no longer just a bystander, no longer a judge observing the system from the bench. She was now entangled in it, a victim of the very injustices she had spent her career trying to fight. As she sat on the hard bench in the cell, her mind began to turn over the possibilities. She knew Jacobson wouldn't stop at a simple weapons charge. Men like him never did. He would try to paint her as a criminal, as someone dangerous and reckless, and she needed to be ready for that. But more than that, she knew she was being targeted for reasons beyond what had happened at the debate. The weight of the situation grew heavier when she heard the sound of footsteps approaching her cell. She looked up to see Jacobson standing on the other side of the bars, a dark smirk playing on his lips. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice dripping with false pleasantry. "You're in quite the predicament, aren't you?" Monica glared at him, her jaw tightening. "You're making a mistake," she said again, her voice sharp and cutting. "This will come back to haunt you." Jacobson chuckled, shaking his head. "You really think your fancy judge title means anything in here? It's just you and me now. No bench to hide behind, no fancy robes. You're just another criminal in a cell." Monica narrowed her eyes, refusing to back down. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Jacobson's smirk widened, and he took a step closer to the bars. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "And I'm going to make sure you never forget this day." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Monica alone in the cold, dimly lit cell. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to remain calm. This wasn't the end, far from it. She still had her mind, her determination, and her knowledge of the law, and she wasn't going to let Jacobson win. Hours passed, and the stillness of the cell began to wear on her nerves. She couldn't help but replay the events of the evening in her mind, searching for the moment where it had all gone wrong. She knew that Jacobson was just the symptom of a much larger problem, one that ran deep within the system, and she was determined to fight it, not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been in her position. Suddenly her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of keys jingling outside the cell. She looked up, expecting to see another officer, but her heart sank when she saw Jacobson once again. This time he wasn't alone. A tall, well-dressed man stood beside him, his expression unreadable. There was something unsettling about the way he carried himself, the way he seemed to command the space around him with an air of authority that rivaled even Jacobson's. The man stepped forward, his eyes locked on Monica. "Judge James, is it?" he asked, his voice smooth and composed. "I don't recall. Smunkovist, I've been hearing a lot about you. Monica frowned, her instincts immediately on high alert. Who are you? The man smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Let's just say I represent certain interests that have taken a special interest in your case. Monica's blood ran cold. She had heard that phrase before many times in her career. It was code for corruption, for powerful people pulling strings behind the scenes to get what they wanted, and now, it seemed, she was the target of those interests. Jacobson leaned against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the exchange with amusement. This is Mr. Morgan, he said with a smirk. He's got some suggestions for how we handle things from here on things. Monica's stomach churned. She had known that Jacobson wasn't acting alone, that there was more to this than a simple arrest. But now, the full scope of what she was up against began to take shape. There were powerful forces at play, and they had set their sights on her. Morgan stepped closer to the bars, his eyes never leaving hers. You see, J. James, you've made some enemies in your time on the bench, powerful enemies, and they don't take kindly to people like you getting in their way. Monica's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to show fear. What do you want from me? Morgan's smile widened. It's not about what we want, Judge. It's about what you're going to do. You're going to stay quiet, and in return, we'll make sure this little misunderstanding goes away. Monica's eyes narrowed. And if I don't? Morgan's smile disappeared, his expression hardening. Then we'll make sure you regret it. If you have a choice to make, Judge James, I suggest you choose wisely. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Monica alone with Jacobson once again. The officer chuckled softly, his voice filled with cruel amusement. Looks like you're in deeper than you thought, huh? Monica stared at the empty hallway, her mind racing. This was bigger than she had realized, but she wasn't going to back down. She had fought too hard to get where she was, and she wasn't going to let men like Jacobson and Morgan take it all away. She would find a way out of this, no matter what it took. This was only the beginning. Hours passed in the dim, cold-holding cell as Monica sat, her mind racing. The conversation with Morgan, the mysterious man who represented certain interests, kept replaying in her mind. It wasn't hard for her to connect the dots. She had made enemies over the years. As a judge, especially a black woman in such a high position, she knew her decisions had rattled many cages, criminal syndicates, corrupt officials. Those who thrived in the grey areas of the law, they all had reasons to want her out of the picture. But she never imagined that they would go this far. The system she had sworn to protect, the law she had dedicated her life to, was now being used against her. This wasn't just a mistake or a case of racial profiling, it was a well-orchestrated attack. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts. She knew how these people operated. They'd try to intimidate her, break her spirit, force her into making a wrong move. But Monica wasn't someone who would cave under pressure. She'd been through too much in her life to let men like Jacobson and Morgan destroy her. She just needed to find a way out of this mess, and quickly. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Monica's heart skipped a beat, and she looked up to see an officer approaching her cell. But it wasn't Jacobson this time. The man who stood before her was someone she recognized: Victor Morgan. The same man who had been in Jacobson's office earlier. He was impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit, his posture confident and composed, but there was something unsettling about him. His eyes were cold, calculating, and there was an air of power around him that made it clear he wasn't just another lawyer or public servant. Victor stood just outside the bars, his gaze locking onto Monica's. "Judge James," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with false pleasantry. "I hope your stay here hasn't been too uncomfortable." Monica didn't bother with pleasantries. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone flat. She wasn't in the mood for games. Victor smirked, a thin, dangerous smile that barely reached his eyes. Straight to the point, I see. Good. I like that. You see, Judge, we have a bit of a situation on our hands. It's unfortunate, really. You in the wrong place at the wrong time, with a weapon that raised some concerns. Monica raised an eyebrow, her temper simmering just beneath the surface. I've told your officers several times I have a legal right to carry the weapon. I'm a judge. I'm licensed. This entire situation is a misunderstanding. Victor's smile didn't waver. Yes, you've made that very clear. And under normal circumstances, this would be cleared up by now. These aren't normal circumstances, are they? Monica's chest tightened. She could feel the trap closing in around her, but she wasn't going to show fear. What are you getting at? Ah. Victor's expression shifted, his smile fading as he leaned in closer to the bars. Judge James, you've made some powerful enemies. There are people out there, very influential people, who would prefer that you were neutralized. And I don't just mean politically. Monica's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. She had always known her career came with risks, but this was different. This wasn't just about political maneuvering, this was about her life. Victor continued, his voice soft but menacing. You've been a thorn in the side of certain individuals, people who have a lot to lose if you continue down the path you're on, and they've decided it's time to take action. Monica's mind raced. She had presided over many cases involving organized crime, political corruption, and police misconduct. Any number of those could have made her a target. But Victor was implying something more than just a vendetta. This was a coordinated effort to bring her down, and Jacobson was just a pawn in the larger game. And let me guess, Monica said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. You're here to deliver their message. Victor chuckled softly, a sound that sent chill down her spine. In a way, yes. But I'm also here to offer you a choice. You see, these people are willing to make this incident disappear. All you have to do is walk away. Monica frowned, confused. Walk away from what? From the bench, Victor replied, his tone casual, as if he were asking her to resign from a social club. Step down as a judge, fade into the background, and this whole situation goes away. No charges, no media coverage, no damage to your reputation. You'll be free to live your life out of the spotlight, of course. Monica's heart pounded in her chest. They wanted her to give up everything she had worked for, to abandon her career and her fight for justice, and in exchange, they would let her go. It was a devil's bargain, one designed to strip her of her power and silence her for good. She met Victor's gaze, her eyes hard. And if I don't? Victor's smile vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. If you don't, then things get messy. Your little misunderstanding with Officer Jacobson, that becomes a full-blown investigation. You'll be charged with illegal possession of a firearm, resisting arrest, possibly even endangering public safety, and with the right spin, the media will have a field day with it. Your career will be over and you might even do time. Monica felt the weight of his words settle over her like a suffocating blanket. She was trapped in a no-win situation. They were going to destroy her either way, unless she gave them what they wanted. But Monica wasn't the type to back down. She had faced adversity before, and she wasn't about to let these men dictate the terms of her life. She straightened her shoulders, meeting Victor's cold gaze with defiance. I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. You can try to scare me, but I won't give in. I've worked too hard to get where I am, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else take that away from me. Victor's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. You're making a mistake, he warned, his voice low and dangerous. Maybe, Monica replied, her voice steady. But I'd rather go down fighting than live in fear of people like you. Victor stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face for any sign of weakness, but when he found none, He stepped back from the bars, his expression unreadable. "Very well," he said coolly. "But don't say I didn't warn you. This isn't over, Judge James, not by a long shot." With that, he turned on his heel and strode down the corridor, leaving Monica alone in the cell once again. She exhaled slowly, her mind still racing from the encounter. She had made her decision, but now she had to deal with the consequences. Time passed slowly in the holding cell. Monica knew that Victor and his associates would not take her defiance lightly. They would come after her with everything they had: fabricated charges, media smears, whatever it took to ruin her career and her reputation. But she wasn't going to back down. She had come too far, fought too hard to let them win. Eventually, the sound of keys jingling outside the cell door caught her attention. The door creaked open and a female officer entered, her expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Judge James," the officer said, "you're being transferred to an interview room. Your lawyer's here to see you." Monica's heart leapt. She hadn't expected a lawyer to show up so soon, but she wasn't about to question her good fortune. She stood and followed the officer out of the cell, through the narrow corridors of the police station, until they reached a small, windowless room. Inside, seated at the metal table, was a man Monica had never seen before. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his dark hair neatly combed, and his expression was calm, almost serene. He stood as she entered, offering a polite nod. "Judge James," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "My name is Derek Harris. I've been assigned to your case." Monica frowned slightly, unsure of what to make of this new development. "Assigned by whom?" "Let's just say you have some friends in high places," Derek replied, his smile faint but reassuring. "They've asked me to represent you, and I'm more than happy to do so." Monica studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his intentions. There was something about him that put her at ease, though she couldn't quite explain why. He didn't seem like the type to be working for the same people as Victor Morgan, but in her current situation, she knew she couldn't afford to trust anyone blindly. "All right," she said slowly, taking a seat at the table. "What's the plan?" Derek sat down across from her, folding his hands on the table. "First things first, we need to get you out of here. I've already spoken with the DA's office and we're working on getting the charges dropped. It's a process, but we have a strong case for dismissal. After that, we can start focusing on the bigger picture." Monica raised an eyebrow. "The bigger picture?" Derek's expression grew serious. "Victor Morgan and his associates. They're not going to stop coming after you, Judge James. They've invested a lot of time and resources into taking you down, and they won't give up easily, but I believe we can turn the tables on them. We just need to play this smart." Monica's mind was spinning. She had expected a long, drawn-out legal battle, but Derek seemed confident that they could not only clear her name but also expose the corruption that had targeted her in the first place. "What do you suggest?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Derek leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. "We gather evidence. We document everything, every threat, every conversation, every move they make. We build a case against them, and when the time is right, we strike. But for now, we need to focus on getting you out of here and keeping you safe." Monica nodded slowly, the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. She had been through many legal battles in her career, but this was different. This was personal, and she knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But with Derek's help, she had a fighting chance. "I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Let's do this." Derek smiled faintly, nodding in approval. "Good. We'll take it one step at a time, and don't worry. Judge James, you're not alone in this." Monica took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't going to let Victor Morgan or anyone else intimidate her into submission. She would fight for her career, her reputation, and most importantly for justice, and she would win. The small windowless room in the police station felt like it was closing in around Monica as she sat across from Derek, her newly assigned lawyer. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the gravity of the situation. There was something about Derek that put her slightly at ease, but she wasn't the type to trust blindly. Still, his confidence had ignited a flicker of hope inside her. Perhaps there was a way out of this after all. Derek leaned forward, tapping his fingers lightly on the metal table between them. "We have some time before things escalate further, but we need to move quickly. Morgan and his associates won't sit idle for long." Monica nodded. She knew this all too well. She had faced political pressure before, but never anything like this. The enemies she had made were powerful, deeply embedded in the system, and relentless. They had already mobilized against her, using Officer Jacobson as their pawn, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted her down for. "Tell me everything you know about Victor Morgan and who he's working with," Derek continued, his voice steady but urgent. Monica exhaled slowly, gathering her thoughts. "Morgan, he's the kind of man who doesn't show up unless he has something to gain. I've never had direct dealings with him, but his reputation precedes him. He's involved with some of the most corrupt individuals in the city: businessmen, politicians, and organized crime. I've presided over cases that have cut into their interests, exposed their operations. I didn't know I'd become such a threat to them, but clearly I have." Derek nodded, his face unreadable, as he absorbed her words. "It sounds like they've been watching you for a while, waiting for the right moment to strike." "Seems that way," Monica agreed, feeling the familiar burn of anger rise in her chest. "And Jacobson, he's just the kind of brute they'd use to execute their dirty work. He doesn't care about justice. He's a tool, someone who feeds off power, and they know how to manipulate men like him." Derek's expression hardened slightly. "Jacobson's got a track record. We might be able to use that against him, but we need to focus on Morgan and whoever is pulling his strings. I'll need to start building a case against them. But in the meantime, we have to keep you protected. They won't stop with just framing you for gun possession." Monica leaned back, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" "They're going to try to ruin you completely," Derek replied grimly. "That means more fabricated charges, more evidence being planted, and even attempts to manipulate the media against you. They'll paint you as corrupt, dangerous, anything that sticks. And if they can get Jacobson to escalate things further, you might be facing a much bigger threat, one that's not limited to the legal system." Monica's mind whirled with the implications. They weren't just after her career, they were after her life, her freedom. She was sure of it now. They wanted her neutralized in every sense of the word. The gun incident at the debate had been the first step in a much larger plan, one that would not stop until she was completely silenced. The fear that gripped her only steeled her resolve. "I'm not going down without a fight," Monica said firmly, her eyes locking with Derek's. "I've spent my entire career upholding the law. I'm not going to let them twist it to destroy me." Derek's lips curled into a faint smile, impressed by her resilience. "Good. That's the spirit we need. But we have to be smart about this. The next few days will be critical. If we can gather enough evidence of corruption, we can take this fight to them." Just as Derek finished speaking, there was a sharp knock on the door, followed by its swinging open. Another officer stepped inside, his face tense. "There's someone here to see Judge James." Monica frowned, exchanging a glance with Derek. "Who is it?" The officer hesitated for a moment. "Victor Morgan. He's in the lobby requesting to speak with you." Monica's stomach twisted, and Derek's face darkened. "Absolutely not," Derek said immediately. "We can't let him." It's all right," Monica interrupted, her tone decisive. "Let him in." Derek's eyes widened. Monica, you can't. I need to know what he's planning, she said firmly. And this might be my chance. Reluctantly, Derek nodded, though it was clear he was wary of the situation. The officer left to retrieve Morgan, and within minutes, Victor Morgan appeared at the door, his sharp suit perfectly tailored, his expression cool and confident. He stepped inside, his eyes locking onto Monica with an unsettling intensity. "Judge James," Morgan said smoothly, his voice dripping with false politeness. "I see you've had some time to think things over." Monica's face remained impassive as she gestured toward the empty chair at the table. "You wanted to speak with me. Go ahead." The Morgan took a seat, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he were savoring the moment. He ignored Derek entirely, focusing all his attention on Monica. "You've made things quite difficult for yourself, Morgan began, his tone calm but laced with menace. "My associates and I have been very patient, hoping you'd see reason. But it seems you're determined to resist. I admire your resolve, but I'm afraid you're making a mistake." Monica leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You and your associates seem to think you can manipulate the system for your own gain, but I'm not afraid of you, Morgan. I've dealt with men like you before." The Morgan's smile tightened. "Perhaps, but you've never faced men like us. You're a smart woman, Judge, but you're not invincible. The gun charge is just the beginning. We can make this much worse for you if you don't cooperate." Monica's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "You want me to step down from the bench and disappear? Why? What are you so afraid of?" Morgan's eyes flashed with something dark, something dangerous. "You've been a thorn in our side for too long. Your rulings, your investigations, they're disruptive. Certain business interests in this city rely on things operating smoothly, without interference from someone like you. It's time for you to understand that." Derek cut in, his voice hard. "And if she doesn't, what happens then?" Morgan's smile faded completely. "If she doesn't, then we make sure she's destroyed legally, professionally, and personally. Your career will be over, Judge James, and if you continue to push us, we'll make sure that it's more than just your career at stake." Monica felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to let Morgan see her fear. "You can try," she said, her voice steady. "But I won't back down. I'm not afraid of you." Morgan's expression remained icy, and for a long moment the tension in the room was palpable. Finally he stood, adjusting his suit jacket. "You're making a grave mistake, Judge. But my associates won't be as patient as I have been." Monica stood as well, her eyes locked onto Morgan's. "Get out," she said coldly. "And tell your associates that I'm not going anywhere." Morgan stared at her for a moment longer, his jaw clenched. Then, without another word, he turned and strode out of the room. As soon as the door closed behind him, Derek let out a slow breath. That was intense. Monica nodded, her mind racing. Morgan's threats were real, and she knew that he and his associates were capable of following through on them. But she wasn't going to let fear control her. "We need to move fast," Derek said, his voice filled with urgency. "Morgan isn't bluffing. They're going to escalate this, and we need to be ready." Monica agreed. "What's our next move?" Derek's eyes gleamed with determination. "We start gathering evidence. We document everything, every threat, every Thrive attempt, every connection between Jacobson, Morgan, and their network. And we make sure we have enough to take them down." Monica nodded, her resolve hardening. "Let's do it." For the next several days, Monica and Derek worked tirelessly, building their case. Derek used his connections to dig into Morgan's associates, uncovering layers of corruption that stretched deep into the city's political and legal systems. Monica, meanwhile, worked to stay ahead of Morgan's efforts to discredit her. The gun charge had been dropped, but she knew it wouldn't be long before Morgan made his next move. And he did. Late one evening, Monica received a call from a journalist she knew, a woman named Lisa Mitchell who had covered several of Monica's high-profile cases in the past. Elisa sounded frantic. "Monica," she said, her voice rushed. "I don't know how to say this, but I just got a tip that someone's trying to leak a story about you. They're saying you've been taking bribes, that you've been involved in some shady deals with criminal organizations." Monica's blood ran cold. "That's a lie." "I know it is," Lisa said quickly. "But they're planning to release it soon. I wanted to give you a heads up before it hits the news cycle." Monica thanked Lisa and hung up, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, Morgan's next move. They were going to smear her reputation in the media, create a narrative that painted her as corrupt, and once that story was out, it would be nearly impossible to undo the damage. She called Derek immediately, and within minutes they were meeting at his office, discussing their options. "They're trying to discredit you in the court of public opinion," Derek said, pacing the room. "If this story gets out, it'll be a nightmare to fight. Even if we can prove it's false, the damage will already be done." Monica's mind raced. "What do we do?" Derek stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression serious. "We go on the offensive. We leak our own story about Morgan, Jacobson, and their corrupt network. We use the evidence we've gathered and make sure the public knows the truth before they have a chance to spin their lies." Monica hesitated for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. If they went public, it would be a risky move. They would be exposing powerful people, and the backlash could be severe. But at the same time, it was their best shot at getting ahead of Morgan's plan. "Let's do it," she said finally, her voice firm. "We take the fight to them." Derek nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll contact a few reporters I trust, for we'll need to move quickly. I got a mud and meant to be tekti and content and titam now was a killer recension." As they worked late into the night, preparing their evidence and crafting their story, Monica couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. This wasn't just about her career anymore, this was about exposing a network of corruption that had infected the very system she had sworn to protect. The next morning, the first article broke. It detailed the connections between Officer Jacobson, Victor Morgan, and several high-ranking officials in the city's government. It exposed bribes, cover-ups, and illegal dealings that had been happening for years, all of which pointed to a coordinated effort to control the legal system from the inside. The story spread like wildfire, and within hours the media was abuzz with reports of corruption and calls for investigations. Morgan's plan to discredit Monica had backfired spectacularly, and now the spotlight was on him and his associates. But Monica knew this was only the beginning. Morgan wouldn't go down without a fight, and she had to be ready for whatever came next. The next few days were a whirlwind. Monica had expected backlash after Derek leaked the story, but the intensity of the media storm was far beyond anything she could have anticipated. News outlets from across the state picked up the story, delving into the details of the corruption scandal that now had Victor Morgan at its center. The allegations were explosive, implicating not only Morgan but also a web of police officers, government officials, and local business figures. The pressure was mounting, and it was clear that Morgan's empire was starting to crack. But Monica knew better than to celebrate too early. As she watched the media frenzy unfold, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the calm before the storm, for Morgan wouldn't take this sitting down, and she suspected he still had cards left to play. Her suspicions were confirmed when Derek received a call from a source from law enforcement late one evening. The news was bad. Victor Morgan had managed to sway a faction of corrupt officers to his side. They were planning something big, something designed to crush Monica once and for all. It wasn't just about discrediting her anymore. They wanted to ruin her life and they were willing to use any means necessary. "We're hearing chatter that they've fabricated new evidence," Derek explained grimly over the phone. "They've got fake documents that supposedly link you to bribery and organized crime. They're going to try to pin you as being part of the very corruption you exposed." Monica's stomach dropped. "When will they make their move?" "Soon. We don't have much time," Derek replied. "They're trying to get this before a judge, someone they can manipulate. And once it's in the legal system, clearing your name will be an uphill battle." Monica gripped the phone tightly, her mind racing. She had expected a fight, but this was worse than she had imagined. They were framing her for the exact crimes Morgan and his network had committed, twisting the truth into a weapon to use against her. She knew how difficult it would be to fight falsified evidence. Once it was in the system, it could take years to clear her name, and by then, the damage would be irreversible. But she wasn't going to let that happen. Not without a fight. "Get everything we have," Monica said, her voice firm. "Every piece of evidence, every connection we've uncovered. We're not just going to defend against this, we're going to expose them. All of them." Derek was silent for a moment. Then he spoke with a hint of admiration in his voice. "You're not backing down, are you?" "Not a chance," Monica replied. "They want a fight. I'll give them one." Aye. The next morning, Monica and Derek launched their counterattack. They held a press conference presenting all the evidence they had gathered over the past weeks. Derek laid out the connections between Morgan Officer Jacobson and the corrupt officials they had been working with. He detailed the bribes, the cover-ups, and the lengths they had gone to in order to protect their criminal enterprise. But most importantly, he made it clear that they had uncovered a plot to frame Monica, using falsified evidence to ruin her career and her reputation. The press ate it up. Journalists asked rapid-fire questions, eager to get more details. Monica answered carefully but confidently. Knowing that every word she spoke could be used against her later, she knew they had to be careful. Morgan's allies would be watching closely, waiting for any mistake they could exploit. As the press conference ended, Monica felt a small sense of relief. They had taken the initiative, getting ahead of the false charges before they could be filed. But she knew this was just the beginning. Morgan wasn't finished. Later that evening, Monica received a call from an anonymous number. She hesitated for a moment before answering, her instincts on high alert. "I have information," a distorted voice said on the other end of the line. "Meet me in the alley behind the courthouse in 1 hour." The call ended abruptly, leaving Monica with more questions than answers. She debated whether to go. This could easily be a trap, but something told her that this was a lead she couldn't ignore. If she wanted to stay ahead of Morgan, she had to take risks. An hour later, Monica found herself standing in the dark alley behind the courthouse, her heart pounding. "Oh!" The street was eerily quiet, and every sound seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, tall, with dark hair pulled back tightly, her face obscured by the brim of a hat. She moved quickly, handing Monica a small envelope before stepping back into the shadows. "That's everything you need," the woman said, her voice low. "Morgan's finished if you use it right." Before Monica could respond, the woman disappeared into the night. Monica quickly opened the envelope, her breath catching as she scanned the contents. It was a list: names, dates, transactions. Every detail of Morgan's corrupt empire, laid out in black and white. It was more than enough to bring him down, once and for all. The next day, armed with the new information, Monica and Derek made their move. They filed a formal complaint with the district attorney's office, submitting the evidence they had received. At the same time, they went public with the information, giving the media the ammunition they needed to turn the tide against Morgan. The response was immediate. Investigations were launched, and Morgan's allies began to scatter like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Jacobson was arrested on charges of corruption and misconduct, and it wasn't long before the pressure on Morgan became too much to bear. In a last-ditch effort to save himself, Morgan tried to flee the country, but he was caught at the airport, attempting to board a private jet. The news of his arrest spread like wildfire, and within hours Monica's name was cleared. The charges against her were dropped, and she was vindicated in the eyes of the public. As she stood outside the courthouse, the sun setting behind her, Monica felt a sense of triumph, but also a deep exhaustion. She had won the battle, but the cost had been high. Still, she had done what she set out to do. She had exposed the corruption that had threatened to destroy her, and in doing so she had brought down one of the most powerful criminal networks in the city. Eric stood beside her, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "You did it," he said simply. Monica nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "We did it." But as she looked out at the city, she knew the fight wasn't over. There would always be people like Victor Morgan, always new battles to fight. But for now, at least she had won, and that was enough. The weeks following Victor Morgan's arrest were a blur of media attention, legal proceedings, and the slow but steady unraveling of the corrupt network that had threatened to destroy Monica. The story had dominated the news cycle, and Monica found herself at the center of a narrative that was part redemption, part triumph, and part cautionary tale. The public, once skeptical and quick to judge, had rallied behind her, admiring her resolve in the face of such a vicious attack. Monica sat in her office, the cool morning light streaming in through the tall windows. It felt surreal to be back at work after everything that had happened. The courthouse was quieter than usual, the normal hustle and bustle of lawyers, clerks and defendants oddly subdued. But Monica welcomed the peace. It gave her a moment to reflect on everything that had transpired. Morgan's fall had been swift. The evidence Monica and Derek had gathered, combined with the anonymous tip that had landed in her hands that fateful night, had proven more than enough to dismantle his criminal empire. His connections within the police force and city government had crumbled under the pressure of investigations and media scrutiny. Those who had once protected him had turned on him, and Morgan now sat in a jail cell, awaiting trial on a myriad of charges, from corruption and bribery to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Officer Jacobson, too, had fallen. His arrest had been particularly satisfying for Monica. The man who had wrongfully arrested her, who had treated her like a criminal based on nothing but her race and his own prejudice, had been exposed for what he truly was, a corrupt officer who had been playing a dangerous game with people's lives. Monica had no doubt that his career in law enforcement was over for good, and justice was finally being served. Despite the victory, there was a heaviness that lingered in Monica's heart. She had won the battle, yes, but it had come at a cost. The ordeal had shaken her in ways she hadn't fully processed yet. Her reputation, though ultimately restored, had been dragged through the mud. She had faced threats to her safety, her career, and her very identity as a woman of integrity. The scars from that experience would take time to heal. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Derek. He stepped into the office, a faint smile on his face, but his eyes showed signs of the exhaustion they had both been living with for weeks. "Got a minute?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Monica nodded, gesturing for him to come in. "Always." He closed the door behind him and sat across from her. For a moment they both sat in silence, taking in the rare quiet that had descended upon them after the storm they'd weathered together. "I just wanted to check in," Derek said. "See how you're holding up." Monica smiled softly. "I'm doing okay. Better, actually. It's been a whirlwind, but I think I'm finally starting to catch my breath." Derek nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've been through hell and back, Monica. I don't think many people could have handled it the way you did." I didn't have much of a choice, Monica replied. But thanks. I couldn't have done it without you. Derek waved his hand dismissively, but there was a glimmer of pride in his eyes. You would have found a way with or without me. But I'm glad I was here to help. They shared a brief moment of mutual respect, a bond forged in the fire of their shared struggle. Eric had proven to be more than just a lawyer. He had been a true ally, someone who had believed in her when others were quick to doubt. And Monica couldn't imagine having gone through the ordeal without him by her side. Have you thought about what's next? Derek asked after a pause. Monica leaned back in her chair, considering the question. I have. I know there's still work to be done. For Morgan and Jacobson were just the tip of the iceberg. The corruption runs deep, and there are still people out there who are part of this. I want to make sure they're brought to justice. Derek raised an eyebrow. You're ready for another fight? Monica smiled, though there was a weariness in her eyes. I don't think the fight ever really ends, Derek. There will always be people like Morgan, always forces working against justice. But if this whole experience has taught me anything, it's that I'm not alone in this. There are people who want to see real change, who are willing to stand up and fight for it. That gives me hope. Derek nodded, his respect for her deepening. You're right, and I'm with you whatever comes next. Monica appreciated his support, but she also knew she had to take care of herself. She had been running on adrenaline for weeks, constantly on edge, constantly looking over her shoulder. Now that the dust had settled, she needed time to heal, to regain her strength before diving back into the fray. I think I'm going to take a little time off, she said finally, surprising even herself with the admission. Just a few weeks. I need to recharge to clear my head. Derek smiled. That sounds like a good idea. You've earned it. Monica nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. Maybe when I get back we can start looking into some of the other names on that list. There's still work to be done. Derek stood, giving her a reassuring nod. We'll be ready when you are. Take all the time you need, Monica. As Derek left the office, Monica sat back and exhaled slowly. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time she felt a sense of closure. She had faced down one of the most powerful and corrupt men in the city, and she had won. But more importantly, she had proven to herself and to others that justice could prevail, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Later that evening, Monica stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching the city as the sun dipped below the horizon. The cool breeze tugged at her hair, and she wrapped her coat a little tighter around herself. It was a moment of quiet reflection, the calm after the storm. As she turned to leave, she saw Victor Morgan being escorted into the courthouse, his hands cuffed behind his back, flanked by two officers. Their eyes met briefly,